And okay,
There we
and
go.
again, welcome everybody to today's LACONI Technical Services section program, Records Cleanup and MarcEdit. And the chair of the program is Laura Murph, the Director of Technical Services at the LISLE Library District, and she's taking over now.
All right, well, welcome everybody. As Joy mentioned, this is a program about database, metadata, cleanup and maintenance. And then I'm going to do a introductory to MarcEdit, which is my favorite program. And every year I plan on sending Terry Reese a Christmas card and thanking him for creating this program back in the 90s. It's amazing. He's worked with it. It's like a personal passion for him. And I can honestly say it has changed my life as a librarian cataloger. So I'm very excited about that. But first, we're going to start with a basic presentation that talks about why we do it, why it's important, what you should kind of be looking for, an overview, and then we're going to take a brief break. And then Downers Grove Public Library, Nora and Mary Kelly are going to present their experiences with working with cleaning up the data in their library. And we'll have a few minutes for questioning, and then I will come back to you and I will screen share my MarcEdit. So if you would like to work along with it on your computer, feel free to go ahead and download it if you haven't already. And then you can play along or you can just watch. It's up to you. And then we'll have a few more questions afterwards that I will attempt to answer. And then we'll set you free, and hopefully you will be super psyched to go out and clean up your metadata. All right. So, as I said, this is Database Record Cleanup. My name is Laura Murph. I am the Director of Technical Services at LISLE Library District. I've been in this position for about 5 years, and I've been in libraries from academic to archives to public for the last 20 plus years. I am passionate about database records. Just so you get a little background on LISLE Library, we are a standalone. We have roughly about 25 full-time. That does include administration, all of it, and about 20 part-time. So we have a very healthy staff. I will say that. And in technical services, we really have a healthy staff, which is not always the case. But as a standalone, it gives us the option to do a little bit more work with our catalog and the behind the scenes stuff. Our ILS is Polaris. We do subscribe to Simply Reports. And within tech services, we have four full-time people, me, 2 librarian catalogers, and then 1 paraprofessional acquisitions. And then we have 2 part-time positions, a paraprofessional that handles most of our serials and any copy cataloging that comes up afterwards, and 1 25-hour associate that handles most of our processing, all of the AV processing, bless her heart. It's just tedious, but she does a wonderful job. So we are, like I said, we have a very healthy department. All right, so why do libraries need to manage their metadata? And because it's intensive, it never stops, but staff and patrons benefit from this. It has far-reaching beyond what is even just on the front end, that you want it all to be right. It really does affect so many different aspects of your patron and your staff's interaction with your library resources. And libraries run on databases. They are everywhere because all databases are is just a fancy term for a lot of information organized. So you have your bibliographic records for everything that you keep that you have access to, whether it's in-house or it's through e-resources, all of that is contained in your bibliographic records. Then you have your item records. That's a whole nother database of the material that is actually owned by your library. And then you have your authority records, which is your controlled vocabulary databases, which hopefully everybody is using at this point. And then you also have your holdings records so that your in-house staff and your patrons and people, anyone looking for these resources know exactly what you have. If you only carry your local newspaper from 1940 to 1960, and then you picked it back up in the 1990s, you want that information to be very specific and correct, because otherwise patrons and staff end up winding down rabbit holes, and it just makes it so difficult. It makes it hard and sometimes sad. I've had, when I first came here, we would have interlibrary requests for articles or our microfilm, and we didn't have that anymore. We had gotten rid of it, but there was no real attempt to make sure that our data was correct for not only in-house, but for out-of-house, for out-of-state, for patrons that aren't registered as our patrons, but need the local history that we contain, and we were giving them the wrong information. And that's a waste of everybody's time. And then of course, patron records. That has lots of, not only the sensitive data that you want to make sure correctly reflects your patron, but it also, links everything together. So those are the main databases that libraries run on. And you often need to change these and keep them updated because they are living databases in a sense, in that they are constantly changing. Our in-house catalog collection changes, what our vendors allow us to access through our databases changes constantly. So it needs to be maintained. For the users, it's always, I felt like saying for the children, but it's for all. But it is really important for our users. And if people can't use the library, can't find what they want, sometimes it's really hard to convince them that we're relevant and we have a purpose, because you get those comments of, my library just never has what I want, or I click on links and they're dead. There's nothing there. So the user needs to be able to access the metadata that we curate and control so that they can, find their resources, identify between the resources, select the resource that they want, be able to obtain access to it, and also use that to explore even more resources that we have in the library. If our metadata is complete and useful and consistent, then all of these 5 factors get met, and our users are satisfied and happy and amazed with the library's ability to provide all of this for them. It's okay to start small. Don't get overwhelmed. When I came into this position, there had really been no metadata maintenance. I'm ashamed to say they were even stripping out OCLC numbers. They were stripping out a lot of data that needed to be in there or was relevant, but they didn't see the further implications. And so they were simplifying everything because they thought that was the best way to make it usable. So one of the things that, you can start out small with is, filling out those records. If they don't have OCLC numbers, if they don't have regular subject headings. These are all things that you can start small and don't feel overwhelmed. It's baby steps. It's all about baby steps. You can go at the pace that you feel comfortable with. Um, and I like to keep the slide up. This was my puppy. She's very cute. Um, and I think it's important to remember that it doesn't all have to be done at once. You can pick and choose. You can build up to bigger things. If you know for a fact that you're going to create a new collection or you need series headings on everything, then start with that and think that project through. And then that small project can then be extrapolated onto bigger ones. So what do you start with? There are lots of known problems that are either um, coding issues. I know that we wind up with a lot of UTF-8 symbols in there that aren't translated when it gets imported into our ILS. So there's all this jumbly goop just because a comma is supposed to be there or an apostrophe is supposed to be there. Call numbers change. I know as a public library and a standalone library at that, I have a lot of freedom to manipulate things to match what our patrons need and to, step outside Dewey and make it work for my data instead of making my data fit somewhere within that. So we will, use call numbers that aren't assigned by Dewey to assign our own. Um, Call numbers change. I'm still trying to get everything out of the 291, it just happens. And that's been sitting on our list for a while. Maybe there's collections that you no longer separate out, but they're still coded that way. We used to have science kits, and there's some things that get coded that way. Well, we've assigned them to a different collection, and we just haven't been able to set the time or note it down in our list of what needs to be done so that it gets done. Um, or you get a new database added. Setting up the time, when we come around to our fiscal year, our adult service librarian picks out the databases that she thinks that um, the library community is going to need. And oftentimes they have MARC records available to us that we can import into our collection to allow our patrons to be able to find those. But remembering to set that time up to make sure that you check it on a regular basis, because not all of these vendors will notify us when there are new materials being added to them. So you have to go out to their site and get their information. Well, that's managing your metadata, and that's something that needs to be done on a regular basis. Um, so you have your, and then subject heading changes. I know we are currently in the process of doing a DEI evaluation of our subject headings within tech services. And this is something where we need to know how many times do we still have illegal aliens listed as a subject heading in our catalog. That's, something that needs to be monitored, and new ones need to be monitored. This is a constantly evolving and changing, and groups that never had a voice are now getting a voice, and we want to be one of those first that recognizes that and make sure that they feel welcome. Another source is just, your ad hoc list. A staff member comes up and says, I cannot find this title. Why can't I find this title? Well, the problem is that the indicators in the 245 were wrong. And it thought that there was a "the" in front. So it was telling it to skip those first 4 spaces, and there was no "the." Now, this happened to be an electronic resource record, which are notoriously bad. And that led me to the next step of figuring out how many other records had this problem. Because if you find one, there's more. There's always more. Um, oh, I'm so sorry. My my mouse got a little crazy there. Um, so you have those. Those are, what I refer to as mechanical issues. Those are mistypings, misreadings, the slips on the keyboard. I notoriously have the problem of, my E's and my R's get separated because I get my hands just a little off-centered on the keyboard. Sometimes those are pretty easy errors to find. They kind of stand out sometimes because usually it's in a call number. Um, so those are more of those mechanical errors that are things that you see repeatedly. One example that we have is on our drop-down list for our shelf reader or for our shelf location. New teen and nonfiction are right next to each other. And the same person is leaking those items to our bibs. And it's quite often that, the scroll on your mouse slips just a little bit and you select the wrong one. So that's another error that's, fairly easy to find and will get brought to the staff and the patrons, and they'll see this error and it'll hopefully get reported to you. Cognitive errors are the ones that are a little bit harder to foresee because it's sometimes just a misunderstanding or a lack of understanding. One of the ones that came up recently is the book on the Pan Am flight attendants, which I highly recommend. It's really good. Come Fly the World, I believe is the name of it. And we have a policy here that if it's a book about a career or a company, we tend to put it in our economics area where it talks about production and businesses. Well, yes, we do, but that's usually if that's what you want to be. Like if it was a book about being a flight attendant, then we would put it there because we want all of the career books to be together. But that's not what this book was. This book was more about what it was like to be a flight attendant and fly for Pan Am. So it really belongs more in the 3X or the 380. I think it's 387 for, flight experiences, airlines. So that was a moment of a cognitive understanding of what we're doing, but it doesn't come up until someone else looks at that record with the knowledge. And it just so happened to be me, looked at it and went, I think what you really want this to go for our patrons to be able to find it, it's in the wrong place. Now, that one error can lead you to look at some of the more complicated or nuanced areas in Dewey that you might need to look at a little bit more. One of the ones that also comes to mind is paganism. It can wind up in the 133 an awful lot, whereas it's somebody's religion. It is still a actively practiced religion. So maybe it should go in the 290s instead, so people don't see their religion right next to UFOs and Bigfoot. So those things can come around just by finding one mistake. The other way to find them, reports. I love reports. I write them all the time. I find one mistake and then I write a report to find every other one that is like that. Your ILS will come with a lot of canned reports for you. that will take care of finding some of the issues that can pop up, like, collections that don't match up. Say you've got, a fiction book that's listed in the nonfiction collection. Those things can stand out when you do reports because you're looking for something very specific. So your ILS will come with reports. Hopefully somebody there is also has access to the SQL serving reporting service that will take in different sources and use that data, and you can manipulate it and find your errors that way. So if you have somebody like me that loves reports, use them. It makes us so happy. Whenever one of my public service librarians comes up to me and asks me for a reading report, I almost want to cry in thanks, because being able to think critically about the filters and the information you want or don't want in a report sometimes aren't the same skill sets that public facing librarians and paraprofessionals have. Just like I can't work a reference desk, they can't write reports. So let's do what we're good at and what we enjoy. So reports, and more reports. Also, if you are an OCLC member, one of the other things that they provide now in their World Share metadata package is they will let you set the criteria that you decide. So if you want records that have been updated to RDA, if you want records that have been merged, if you want records that have new subject headings, new genre terms, you can fill out that those choices within OCLC and they'll send you a report. I get a monthly report. Now, until I make my other fixes and clean up our holdings with OCLC and all of that, at first I wasn't able to use them because there was so much going on. Now it's a little bit easier, and sometimes I pick and choose which collections get those updates. Like subject heading updates, I find are a little bit more important for the nonfiction collection. So I make an effort to get that information and that data updated in our system. Whereas, making sure that a children's picture book got a new genre subject heading isn't necessarily as useful. Considering the time, you have to weigh the amount of time that it takes to clean these up to the end result. So records reports love reports. You can run them for duplicate titles, records with no holdings, no items, anything that's missing fields, items that are on the fly and not attached to anything, and also reviewing your suppressed records. Is it suppressed for a reason, or was it suppressed and then was it meant to be suppressed and it needs to be shown again? These are some of the ones that you can routinely do and assign to a staff member to keep updated on so that it doesn't fall behind. You can also find projects to work with through your routine workflow, like I found with Come Fly the World. Weeding, which is why I really like handling the weeding reports, because not only does it make sure that the selector gets exactly what they want to make their deselection, I also can find errors that come up. If I know that that selector does not deal with this collection, like they're adult only, no children's books, and then children's books start popping up on their weeding list, I know that there is something in the background that is causing that issue, and I can run a report to find those that I may not have been aware of before. I find a lot of statistical issues that way. if you have any big, large scale projects coming up, we had one where we were adding categories to our picture books for the children so that all the animal books were together and all the community, books were together. And through that project, we were able to make sure that our picture book records were were updated and better. As we all know, things last a little longer upstairs, and some of those records were brutally empty. But in the regular process of having to change the call numbers, we were also able to add subject headings, um, clean up the RDA, mark any records that we wanted to bring in the updates for so that we could get a better collection of data for our patrons. Also, if you are migrating to a new ILS, which I dread the thought of, I've done it once in my career, and I think I still have PTSD from it. It can be really traumatizing, especially, I feel especially for catalogers, because that will show you everything you did wrong, everything. Things that you didn't even think were wrong. But depending on what systems you're going from or to, it may be a problem in their computer system where it wasn't before. All right. All right, so best practices. You want to be safe. You do not want to lose everything. I I had a hard learning curve in the beginning, and I was really excited about that OCLC World Share record that told me everything that had been updated with RDA and had, better subject headings. And I got really excited and I brought in a file. Luckily, I didn't bring in the entire file. But once I brought that in and attempted to overlay our old records with the new records, I came up with all kinds of problems that made me realize that this was going to be a bigger project than I thought it was. Um, if you don't have access to your ILS on a test server, um, find somebody who does, ask them if it's possible. Most of our ILS vendors will provide you with a test server, a test version for you to use and practice with. It really is the best. I'm a try and keep trying until you succeed. I like that trial and error process, and testing is what you want to do. You do not want to mess up the catalog that the public sees. It's scary, it's time consuming, and for me, I just felt like I needed to put the dunce hat on my cap. I felt like I had a moment of blankness and I couldn't believe I did it. So don't go through that. Don't do that to yourself. Test everything. Um, and make sure there's a copy of the original data that you can always go back to. As you're testing things, once you've tested it and you know you want to do it, document it. Document everything. You do not know the level of skills that the people that you're working with are at what they're at. So you want to be able to have lots of help with this. So I document everything. I screenshot, I do, arrows and circles and, highlight red, everything so that it is super clear on what we're doing and we get the same result. In connection with that, communicate all parties involved, even parties that aren't directly involved. All staff members are affected by this. So you do want to make sure everybody knows what's going on. A schedule, just throwing the stuff out there. Sometimes that doesn't work. We need to have a structured schedule that says when you're going to start, how long you think it'll last, um, when you need to go back and check again to see if there's any new updates coming. Um, and you want to know who's doing what. There might be projects where one project of one staff is affecting the other staff, and that needs to be combined. You need to know all of that. They all need to know what's going on. To make sure there's a schedule, and then track all of it. If one of your staff members hit an issue with the RDA conversion and couldn't go any further, then they need to know that, and that needs to be marked down so that everybody involved with the project knows it and doesn't start expecting things that aren't coming. And then pick your tools. Pick the tools that you need. Their technology is amazing these days, and you will find something. You will find the tool that does exactly what you need it to do. All right, with the documentation, I just covered this a little bit, but there are a few things that you want to make sure that's in there. The name of the project, what its purpose is, a brief one. It doesn't have to be in detailed. The staff members that are undertaking the task, any dates related to it, like I said, if there's a point where you want to come back and check and see what's been done. There's a follow-up date that should be included. Include what's been completed, what hasn't, and make sure you have links to all of your external resources. If there's documentation on how to do the process, make sure that there's a link within your documentation about the project that links out to those directions or to sites to use. It should all be centralized so that you don't have to look everywhere in different places. And everyone needs access to it so that everybody involved with it can update it, so that you do have current information. Oh, I'm so sorry. There we go. Some of the some more examples of the metadata that you can do: the call numbers, enhancing the full, subject headings. If you need to truncate them, you need to add them, new cutters, changes from Dewey. You can do record cleanups if you want to add RDA or fill out. You want content headings in your nonfiction. You can run a report and find that. There are a lot. I'm gonna have to wrap up here in a minute. If you want to add reading levels for your children's collection or even your adult collection or your teen, you can start to do that, and that's also a service that you can start to match up. And there's lots of different ones to go through, whether or not you want the LISLE or the accelerated reader. This is probably a little bit more important in school libraries than we do find on the patron side. But when I did the children's and asked them what they wanted, they did actually want the LISLE and the accelerated reader information in there because patrons and teachers were using that as their goalpost, as things for students to look for. So we wanted it there so that it could be indexed and searched easily through our catalog. Record deduplication was just a big moment for me recently because we had over 30,000 electronic records that were duplicate, which was really crowding our catalog, really crowding it. So some of the tools that you can use that I found are really handy. Drive, that's Google Drive. Of course, it has an aspect for everything for file storage and synchronization of your documentation. Slack is mainly for communication, messaging within. Basecamp, there's a number of project management tools that you can use. Some of them are free, some of them have, cost or limited costs. Basecamp is a project management that's an online collaboration app that has communication inside of it as well as the project management. A number of libraries will create internal wikis to track all of the information. It's a nice way. We're all familiar with Wikipedia and the way that wikis work, and it can be a very comfortable way to find information. It allows for that embedded link to, to take you to the next step. Excel, an old favorite of mine. Before all of these other fancy things came along, Excel was my sheet. That we just gave access to everybody and we just had to keep updating it. Trello, Wrike, Confluent, and Asana, I think I pronounced all those correctly. They are all project management tools. Like I said, some of them are free, some of them aren't. Some you can actually host on your own server if you have one. Some of them can be hosted by that organization. You can pay them to handle it. However it works, depending on whether or not you have internal IT or external, any of those project management tools can be super helpful. And then shake it off. Shake it off. Know when good enough is good enough. You cannot fix everything. There's just not enough hours in the day. There's so much metadata out there. If your plan is to make it perfect, which I know as catalogers, some of us are all about that perfection. But know when good enough is good enough. If it's working, and don't sweat the small stuff. And again, that's my puppy shaking at the lake. So that's pretty much my introduction to the thought process behind Meta and the steps you can take to start planning your cleanup project. Oops, I have two mouses. I keep clicking wrong. So yeah, I think I am, oh, I'm still a little early. So were there any questions for me, or I might just go ahead and see if we need a few minutes. I will be making my PowerPoint available for y'all that has some of the notes in there and some of the specific things that I talked about. And I'll mention again, if anybody wants to go ahead and start the download process for MARC, I can give you the web address. I can get out of chat. Oops, nope. I'm sorry. I am hitting buttons. There we go. So yeah, I will put in the.
Hey, Laura, we do have a question.
Yes.
From Nancy at Warren. Do you have more details, advice, tools, groups, etc., regarding work on EDI and subject headings?
What we did was I had one of my staff members attend the DEI presentation that LACONI did a month or so ago. And based off of that, I had him go through our subject headings, mainly ones that dealt specifically with people as our first group, and had him go through and find anything that might be controversial or might be a little insulting, or illegal aliens is the big one, but also mixed race, biracial, those kinds of terms. A lot of gender dysphoria is insulting, and not necessarily the appropriate terms that we should use now. So we went through that manually. And then the next step is to run a report that finds those subject headings. We'll need to evaluate the books, make sure that the books are still appropriate and relevant, and not not dismissive. And then we went to our authority files, and that was where we made the changes and kind of flipped the 100 in the 1XX into the 4XX and added our own 1XX, so that if patrons were used to the old terms, it would still bring them to what they need, but also inform them to what they are, what the terms that we are using now. We used a lot of outside sources. Homosaurus is the one I can think of, but there's also an AAPI has a list of terms that are preferred. And so yeah, that's kind of been our progress. So yeah, Sarah just mentioned the Homosaurus and the AAPI. So yeah, we're really excited to get that started. We're going to start with our subject headings, and then through that, we'll be able to link up with our adult services, and they'll be able to review more of their titles and make sure that they don't have any holes in the collection where it should be. All right, I hope that helped. Anybody else? I know DEI is a big topic right now. So yeah, it is. It's becoming more important, and it's also one of the reasons why I highly recommend authority files, especially until we get linked data and RDA and BibFrame into our ILSs. Then authority files really are what we have. We download ours into our system, and and as a standalone, that allows us to manipulate just ours and not cause any confusion in the outside our library. So we don't upload these new ones to OCLC or anything. We keep them all internal, but it does give us control over that, and it allows for our ILS to make those changes for us. I tend to like using MarcEdit for all of that stuff because our ILS is doing a lot, and it takes a long time for changes to take effect, whereas in MarcEdit, it's measured in seconds. In Polaris, it can be measured in, hours sometimes, depending on how many you're changing. So that's just another added plugin to MarcEdit because I love MarcEdit. All right, so I think we're going to take a brief little pause while we switch presentations and get that worked out. So I am going to stop my sharing, and I'm going to mute myself, and everybody go and get another cup of coffee, another cup of coffee, or whatever else you need. All right, thank you.
Okay, recording has resumed.
Okay. So welcome back, everybody, from your brief break. I would like to introduce our next presentation. It'll be given by Mary Kelly Marquez and Nora Masney from Downers Grove Public Library. They are a consortium, so pay attention. I know we have a lot of consortium people. As a standalone, I tend to not think about it. So I will let them start their presentation. Thank you, ladies.
Great. Thank you so much, Laura. Hi, welcome to our presentation on item data cleanup. We're really glad to be here. And we hope that our presentation inspires you to start a small data cleanup project of your own. We'll just go ahead and get started.
Hi, I'm Mary Kelly Marquez. I'm an Access Service Library Clerk. I've been at Downers Grove Public Library since 2007.
And I'm Nora Masney. I'm the cataloging librarian at Downers Grove Public Library. I've been here since 2018. And you'll see at the bottom, we have our contact information. We do encourage you to reach out to us if you have any questions after the presentation. We'll provide it again at the end of the presentation, just for if you have anything you'd like to reach out about.
So right now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Downers Grove Public Library. As Laura mentioned, we are part of the SWAN Consortium. We have 6 employees in our department, 1 full-time manager. Nora is our full-time cataloging librarian, and I am one of 4 part-time clerks. We use Cersei, Dynex, Symphony ILS, and Blue Cloud Analytics for reporting. Now, this just as a disclaimer, as she said, many of you may be of the consortium, so some of the examples may be more applicable to a SWAN library who uses Cersei workflows, but the concepts are pretty universal. So if you pay attention, there's good nuggets of information that you can pull out for your library to use.
Absolutely. So first, we're going to talk specifically about item data cleanup. As I'm sure you'll see later when Laura shows us MarcEdit, there's some really cool stuff you can do with bibliographic data cleanup and authority data cleanup. But we're going to talk about item data cleanup mainly because we are part of the SWAN Consortium, which has a shared catalog with 100 different libraries. So anything that we did to edit bibliographic data is going to be reflected for all those different libraries. So it's a little more fraught than just doing it for your library alone. And another reason for us is that we want the projects to involve the entire department. So as Mary Kelly said, there's 6 people in our department. 2, me and the department head, have the permissions to edit bibliographic data, but the 4 clerks can only edit call number and item level records. So we want to have projects that everyone can participate in. And I think that might be the case at a lot of your libraries as well. So another thing, is that item data cleanup is very approachable. Like Laura said, it's okay to start small. And for me, item data cleanup is starting small. It's really approachable and it can get the ball rolling on improvements over time. I think that's later. We'll move on. Yes, okay, it's on this slide. I want to talk about the goals of item data cleanup. So the first point that we have is that we want to improve data output for our reporting. So within Blue Cloud Analytics, many of our reports are based on call number ranges. So it's really important for us to have call number consistency. And to that point, when we're running reports for our cleanup projects, you have to be really careful about defining your call number ranges so that you get the results you're looking for. A huge goal is to ease the use of the catalog for staff and for patrons, and the use of the shelves for patrons and for staff. We just want to make things easier for people to find, to be able to browse, whether it's in the catalog, on the shelves. And the whole purpose of our department is to make it easier for patrons to access materials, which is why we're called access services, even though for most libraries we might be called tech services. Another thing is that we want to prevent problems before they arise. So whenever people find inconsistencies, they bring them to us, we fix them, and we very much appreciate that because we want the catalog to be clean. We want it to be good. but we want to keep that as infrequent as possible. So we try to anticipate what problems might arise or might accumulate and fix them before people have to bring them to us, and ultimately save staff time overall throughout the whole library, not just within our own department. And then this last point is critical over this past year, which was to provide meaningful work during any slow weeks or closures. So over this past year, we've all dealt with closures and trying to find meaningful work for people to do when we're closed. But another thing that was really huge for us over this past year is that we had extremely inconsistent order fulfillment from Baker and Taylor. We would go a week or more without getting any significant shipments and then receive 46 boxes on a single day. And this made it really difficult for the clerks to manage their workflow. There's only so many webinars that they could do without pulling their hair out. So by having a consistent and meaningful back burner project that anyone can work on, the whole department was better able to manage their workflow.
So now I'm going to give you a basic overview of our item data cleanup process, and then we're going to get into a little bit more details as we go on. First, you want to get an idea. Once you get an idea of the type of project you want to work on, you're going to ask Nora, the cataloging librarian, or your manager to run the report for you. You identify what needs to be changed. Then you are going to create and edit that documentation. Now, one key thing here is looping in other departments. For example, circulation. Circulation has the ability to pull items as they're being returned. If we're working on a project, they can pull in certain titles or whatever and then bring them to us so that we can avoid having to scan the shelves for them. You want to edit the records and the physical items. And then finally, you're going to rerun the report to catch any stragglers. And again, we're going to go into more depth right now.
Right. So the first step is get an idea of what sort of project you even want to do. So here's a few ways that we found projects at Downers Grove. The first is from other library staff. If someone mentions that something's weird, we don't just fix that one item and go on with our day. We try to look into it and see, is this a symptom of a larger issue? Is this just someone missed a keystroke? Or is this something where this might happen across several records and we should create a project to try to fix those? Similarly, this can happen through patron inquiries as well. So for example, we had a patron notice a really small line that indicated that we kept a year's worth of issues of a certain magazine when we didn't keep any issues of the magazine and didn't even subscribe anymore. This led us to realize that we had multiple old serial control records that were putting these lines that patrons could see saying that we owned these items or a year's worth of holdings. If we had just fixed that one record and moved on with our day, that same patron or someone else could have come up month after month and said, where is this record? Where is this magazine? So it's really important to look into it and then fix it to prevent issues for people in the future. Another way that we find projects is just by doing a simple call number browse search in our ILS, which the workflows is the staff side of our ILS. And when you do that, some weird things might jump out at you. You know, maybe things aren't sorting the way you expect them because they should be alphabetical, but they're in weird chunks. Or maybe half of a section says CD opera, while the other half says CD operas. And so it's sorting alphabetically twice instead of all going together. Either way, this is a good, but admittedly tedious way to find things you might want to fix. Similarly, you could physically walk through the stacks. And this can help reveal inconsistencies in labeling that may or may not be reflected in the catalog, and you can find projects to do that way. A big way that we actually find things is through our automated materials handler or sorter. So if something is not sorting correctly when it gets returned through the automated materials handler, circulation employees will bring it to us and just be like, hey, this isn't sorting correctly. Can you look into what's wrong? because the sort matrix is largely based on call number, a lot of times it's a call number error or inconsistency or weird choice that is going to create these issues. We'll talk a little bit more in depth about this later when we talk about one of the projects that we did. And then lastly, there's some data fields that are just inconsistent with one another. For example, if an item has an item type of book J and an audience level of adult, those should never go together. And so what we can do is run reports to find these combinations and then look at the items and or the records, figure out which field is wrong, and then correct them all at once so that we can have things correct. So the next step after you've gotten your idea is to actually run a report so that you have data to work off of. As we mentioned, we use workflows and Blue Cloud Analytics for our reporting. We're not going to go too in depth into the actual mechanics of those particular systems because everyone might have a different one. So instead, what's most important is to know your own reporting system well, or to have someone in your library who does. Some systems have really precise inputs and you get really precise outputs. This is, for us, is kind of like the reports module within workflows. You put in exactly what you want, you get really specific results, and it's real time, which is nice, but you can only run one report at a time, and it's just not practical within a consortial environment. Other report systems use more general templates, and this for us is like Blue Cloud Analytics. Within Swan, things are more centralized, so we use provided templates and make them work for our needs. You might have extra information in your results, but that can always be edited out. The screenshot that you'll see on the screen is an example of a report with a lot of outputs from Blue Cloud Analytics. What you can do if you only need 3 or 4 of those, you can just export this to a spreadsheet, delete all of the columns that with the information you don't need, and just simplify the document that everyone's going to be working off of to help prevent mistakes. So once you know your system, you're going to choose or design and run your report, and then identify what needs to be changed. So basically, you can just highlight fields that you want to change or do whatever is needed to indicate what's actually being done in the project.
So now it's time to get started. So you want to strike a balance between specialization and cross-training. In our department in Access Services here in Downers Grove, each of the clerks has an area of specialization, be it serials, audiovisual, kits, video games. And it's important that each member of the team is cross-trained in those areas so that they can work on the project as well with having a baseline knowledge. So you want to remember that cleanup happens in the database as well as on the shelf. You think about that things like the labels need to be changed on the physical item, but it may also need to be entered differently into the system. So to keep in mind, you want to have knowledge of how things ought to be. You want to have attention to detail and very good documentation.
So here's an example of some documentation that we have. This is part of our master list with all the information about how each type of item in the library should be entered in the catalog. It has the call number, the item type if it's new, the location if it's new, both of those things if it's not new, item category 1, 2, etc. It's a lot of information. It's a really great resource to prevent errors when initially entering materials, and also a great resource when correcting or changing data points for a specific collection. However, as you can see, it's kind of a lot to look at. So for each project, we'll generally create a much simpler and more focused documentation, like this one, which was made for our J audiobook and playaway call number change project. So by pulling out specific information for a project, it ensures that everyone who's working on it has the same information and it doesn't get lost in that huge document. And so for this project, everyone in our department had this, but we also gave a copy to circulation so that when items were returned, they could tell if something was done the old way or the new way. The new way, they would make sure they would just go and shelve them as usual. But if anything was done in the old style, they knew that it had to be changed and would put it on a separate cart for us and bring it back to us so that we didn't have to constantly be checking for materials that were recently returned.
And now it's cleanup time. So you want to designate your point person for the particular project. The reason for this is that you're going to have to maintain a digital report as well as a physical copy of the report. And you don't want to have too many hands in the pot. So the point person is going to create or print the physical copy that all of the team members are going to work on together. The clerks will then take the report, the physical report, and go to the shelves, bring the item back, or make the necessary changes on the label and or the record, and physically cross it off the list, and then return that at the end of their shift to the point person, or leave it for the point person when they are next scheduled. And the point person will then go to the master digital list and delete those off of the record. So that way we have a master list that's nice and clean. You want to make sure that you maintain one master list only, and that communication is the real key, like Laura mentioned earlier. Some of the projects that, one in particular that I worked on was having to do with the video games. Our video games are in 3 different locations. There's the physical case, which is we call the dummy case, which is just an empty case that's on the patron stacks. The sleeve that has the actual game is behind the desk in circulation. And then the staff notes in workflows, they all have a number assigned to it. In this example, it's 2279. So what we did was we had to make sure that the physical case actually had the game in circ, and that the case and the record all matched. What I actually did was I had my boss, Amy, run a report, and then I went back to circulation and I went disc by disc through each of them. And you can see we're up into the 2000s. So there were several, and it took a while, but we found ones that didn't have cases where the numbers weren't matching. We found a lot of inconsistencies that we were able to correct. Another project that we worked on was the kids' AV call numbers. In this project, we worked shelf by shelf. We fixed the labels and the records at the same time. And as Nora had stated, we worked with circulation so that they were pulling those things as they were returned and bringing them to us before putting them back on the shelves.
Yeah, and this is one of the projects that we started because of the sorter. The way we used to do the call numbers was a little strange. So for like a fiction audiobook, it would say J Fiction CD Smith. But then to create consistency, if it was nonfiction, it would say like J123 CD ABC, which was causing issues for the sorter because since it's mostly call number based, it saw J123 and was like, oh, it's a book. And it would throw it in the book bin. And so circulation was coming to us and saying these playaways will not sort correctly. And we realized that this was an across the board issue. And so we opted to change the call number, kind of swap the middle pieces. So instead it would say JCD123 ABC. And this allowed the sorter to put everything that started with JCD or J playaway into the correct bin for reshelving.
And for the project completion, you always want to check for stragglers twice. So if you're checking for the stragglers, you want to make sure that if it says J Fiction CD and it should be JCD Fiction, that you're checking the catalog, checking the shelf, and that you're having someone else, another set of eyes.
Sorry, we have an announcement.
For those who have not been vaccinated, masks are required throughout the building. Thank you.
pardon me. So as I was saying, you want to make sure you're checking the catalog, checking the shelf, and having another set of eyes go back over what you've already double checked to recheck your work and make sure that they're catching any of the stragglers. Now, in our library, we have special sections, whether it is the book of the month or a homework section in our kids department. You want to make sure that you're checking those audiobooks as well to make sure that you're changing the records to reflect what they should be.
And so in addition to these sorts of one-off projects, there's also a lot of ongoing projects that are really item data cleanup. You might already be doing this without realizing that what you're doing is item data cleanup. These are things like you're running your monthly missing or lost in transit reports, which help keep your database clean and accurate so that it reflects what you truly have in your collection still. There's also a situation of like recurrent issues, so that accumulate over time. So for us, for example, a lot of our on order records are imported into the catalog with a class scheme of auto. And this creates an auto-generated call number. Now, when we get the item, we overwrite the call number, and we're also supposed to change the class scheme from auto to Dewey. And for the most part, we do. But inevitably, there's always a few that might slip through. And when this happens, it actually causes the items to sort weirdly within the catalog. So it's going to alphabetize everything in the class scheme auto first, and then follow it by everything in Dewey, the Dewey class scheme alphabetized. And so it creates some weirdness. And because we know it's a recurrent issue, what we can do is choose to run this report yearly or quarterly or whatever works. And so when you find issues that can accumulate over time like this, it's good to have a schedule to fix them so that it doesn't become a huge project years down the line. And what's nice about this as well is that you can schedule these for certain times of year that are traditionally slower, and you might not be getting as many materials in, for example.
So if you could take a moment just to think, what is something that you would like to achieve with your cleanup project at your library? To piggyback up what Laura had said earlier, it is okay to start small. You want to think about your library's goals. What is the mission? What are you trying to achieve? And how are you going to achieve it? With that in mind, if anyone has any questions, we'd be happy to answer them.
If no one has any questions at this time, we'd like to thank you so much for watching this presentation. Our email addresses are here as well. And we do encourage you to reach out if you have any questions, if you're starting any projects and want our thoughts on ways you might be able to work through it.
Or just encouragement.
Absolutely. We welcome all of that. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, ladies. That was wonderful. All right. So I am going to now share my screen of my MARC editor. Share. Okay. So what you're looking at right now is just the MARC editor. So when you download MARC for you, you'll originally get a little interface, and that interface will link up to help documents that Terry has created, and other resources like that. But this is the page where you can import into your MARC records into, so that you can manipulate them and then import them back into your ILS. So the first part's pretty straightforward. I'm going to bring in a text file that I have that I'm going to help manipulate. I exported this through my ILS through Simply Reports. There's a couple of options in Polaris, as I'm assuming there are in other ones. I've worked with CRC Dynex, and I've worked with Millennium, another III product, and all of them will allow you to export at a certain amount. Sometimes you can get permission so that you can be more selective in your exporting. And that's what this was. So I just picked a few. I'm going to import them in. So a couple of things to keep in mind when you're looking at this is the leader is combined. And these equal marks, that is part of the special coding that Terry has done so that this program recognizes that that's a MARC field. That's what that equal sign is. It's just a place marker. There are options if you need line numbers to make it easier to look at. You'll notice that he does, it does count the empty lines in between each record. That's what separates it. I don't actually need numbers on mine, so I tend to just make those go away. Now, one of the things that Terry has done that is absolutely wonderful is he has pre-written some of the code changes that come up the most often. And when you're starting a project, depending on how much you've done, this can be the best way to start. So I'm going to work my way across the toolbar here just real quick. I'm going to show you the file drop down. It's got everything you think. It's got the export, import. You'll notice that Open Refine is here, which is another data evaluation program that allows you to input information from various sources to compile your data and evaluate it. I'm not going to go into Open Refine right now. It too is a wonderful program, and Terry has made it integrated into MarcEdit, that if you are familiar with it, it's wonderful to learn. I'm still in the process, so I haven't actually used it for any of my projects. And then you'll notice that everything else on the file is pretty much what you would think would be in a file menu. Now in the edit, this is one of my favorites because in the edit drop down is where Terry has given us all of his a lot of his pre-written stuff. So there's your basic, copy, paste, clear, find and replace work just like they do in any other program. So if you have, if you want to find and replace something, if it's an entire MARC field or if it's even just part of a MARC field. So for example, if you're assigning new call numbers, we keep ours in the 092 field. So you would put the equal sign to let it know that you are going to identify a MARC field. You put in the MARC field. This is important. It is an implied 2 spaces between the MARC field and the indicators. And if you don't put it there, it will cause issues and nothing will work. So you put in your 2 empty spaces. One thing that threw me off a lot is that instead of using forward slashes, Terry uses backward slashes for no indicator. We do not use indicators in our 092, so I enter in my 2 backslashes so that it only finds the 092s that have nothing. The symbol that he uses is the $sign. So we put in the $sign. we put in the field. Actually, I just noticed I have an ish. We put in the field, and then you can type in whatever you want. If what you're looking for is just ease, and you want to replace it, again, you have to build it all out. You then just put in what you like to change it to. Picture books. I just realized the coding wrong on mine, so I'm going to change one thing right there. And then you can hit the replace all. It told you exactly how many it changed. I hit OK. This window will stay up, so if you have more to do, and it will remember ones that you've put in. So if there's something that you're doing very common, like when we were changing our picture books, our picture book call numbers, this is where you can easily repeat it without having to type in every single time. So I'm going to close that out, and you can see here that it added it whenever it found it. Now, if I look at that and I go, oh my goodness, that's not where I wanted to put it. My favorite button, the most important button in my viewpoints, is under Edit, and it's the special undo. This special undo will undo everything that was just done. So if with this one, because I was just running one task, it'll undo that one task, and it puts me right back to the beginning. So this is one of those things where you can test what is going to happen, how well you're writing anything for your MARC editor. It's a wonderful button. I love this button. If you run tasks that compiled tasks that do 2, 10, 20 manipulations at a time, that special undo will undo everything that was wrapped up in that task. So if you set up a task to change a call number, change a subject heading, and prep something for RDA, you run through that and then you realize that you coded one of those steps wrong, you can hit that special undo and it'll send you back to where you were before. So there's no fear, no fear. So that's Edit. That's the special undo. You notice once I used it, it's grayed out and I can't use it again because I haven't yet completed a task. The next step that I find to be very useful is this Edit Shortcuts. I'm not sure why it's called Edit Shortcuts, but these are shortcuts that Terry has written into MARC. And they are so useful. One of them, sorry, my mouse slipped, is the change case. And this can affect whether or not you like your 245 to be consistent. I do. It's one of those OCD things coming from being a cataloger, back when it was very important to count your spaces and uniformity. I still like the uniformity because I think it helps the staff when they're looking through our the client interface, because everything looks the same, so nothing is jarring out there. And I also think it helps with the patrons too. So these options are pretty straightforward. This will make everything lowercase, uppercase, title case. That just means first word, and proper names can be an issue just because it may not recognize them. An initial case just means everything is the first letter is actually, that's wrong. Capitalization is the first letter. So I like to make sure that my 245s are in title case. So you click that, it'll ask you where you want to do this. So if you are trying to clean up your 520s, then you would put in 520. This is going to be for the title. Depending on which task you are using, and this can be a little confusing, will depend on how you enter the information that's requested. So for this one, it knows that we are dealing with MARC tags. And the example shows you that you don't have to put the equal sign for it to know that this is a tag number. So you can just put in the 245 subfield A and hit OK. It will verify that this is what you want. It found 126 records where it wasn't properly done or done the way that I want it. And so I say OK. And you can scroll down and you can see where it made the changes. Now I can notice from this change that it didn't put it in title in the order that I wanted. So I can, again, my favorite button, special undo. And then you just try again. Go in here, here. There it goes. So that's something. Underneath this edit shortcuts, besides the changing the case, the field edits is the next really important changes that he has written in for us. The ones I tend to use the most are the clean the smart characters. That's when you get in, sometimes it's regex, coding, a lot of times it's from if your system isn't necessarily reading UTF-8 properly, this can happen and you wind up with those, I think I mentioned it before, all these symbols that really just equal a apostrophe. You can add in specifics. If there is a character coding issue that you see consistently, but does not get fixed from the provided list, this pop-up will allow you to do that. So it says, would you like to update the character list? I can say yes, and a text box opens with the most common corrections that need to be made. You'll notice these codes here. Those are those codes that equal, an apostrophe or a semicolon. And you'll see what it turns it into. And you can add those if you need to. And you can just resave it. You'll close it out. And it will run. You don't have to push another button. No, it said nothing was identified, mainly because so many of these records are missing 520s that there's not a whole lot of text here for it to check. Another one that's in here that I use quite a bit is to find records with duplicate tags. If you need to generate 13-digit, then that's what you can do. If you need to create them, these are a lot of older records. So if I generate that, it'll ask me where I want to put it. I click OK. It created 160, and you'll see now I have that 13-digit ISBN number. Just so you know, the MarcEdit that I use is the non-administrator. I do not have us linked up, and I'll show you how you can share different tasks that you've used. This is the MarcEdit 7. I just saw the answer on the bottom there, or the question. So I hope that helps. Administrator, if you're doing it on your personal computer, is fine. If you're within the library, your system administrator is going to need to help you load that on and connect you to all your other users. But it is possible to share within MARC, within your department, within your area. But I find it easier to use the non-administration, so I don't have to bother our IT. Anyway, sorry about that. I did mean to mention that earlier. So thank you. Okay, so we did that. The next thing in the field edits, let's see, I think, yep. And so those are just some really quick ones. There's other options on here about leaders, control numbers. I tend to do most of that within our ILS. It just has a more straightforward interface, but you can do it through MarcEdit. And there's lots of options there. If you want to check into all of that and deal with a little bit more of the robust options, it's this preferences under the edit drop down that will give you a window that tells you everything. You can remove stuff from that main window. It has choices for MarcEdit if you want to link out, if you have a preferred code, font. There's ease of use, locations. This down here, the ILS integration and the OCLC API. The ILS integration currently only works with, I want to say, Alma. He is expanding it to the other ILSs. He's trying to work with them so that you can have that direct communication between your ILS and MarcEdit. But right now it's just with, I believe, like I said, Alma. So I do not have anything configured for that, but you hopefully, because Terry's amazing, that stuff is coming out. The other thing is this OCLC API integration. If you have one, this is where you can input it. And what it'll allow you to do is to actually bring in the records and directly into MarcEdit and out to OCLC to connection. And a number of other things that it can help connect to. I have also not done the IPA integration. We do have one and we use it within our system. I just haven't used it with MarcEdit yet. Oops, where's my close? There we go. Okay. Fonts is pretty obvious. I won't even go over that. Reports. This is one way that you can find out if you need to like pull out certain records, like you want to know how many of these records, they're all supposed to be books, but you can find out that, you know, yes, there's books here, but it would also tell me if there just happened to be an audio book mixed in, or if there was some kind of coding wrong in the leader information, but I ran my report off of item information. And this is where that can pop up. If you think you're dealing with books, then this should be all books. And the reverse way, you can only pull out records by a specific type. Field count, exactly what it says. It counts how many times a field is found. If there's a field that is missing, like say you want to make sure that there's an 035, that there's an OCLC number, or your legacy control numbers, you can find this out and you can export it if you have a preference. It'll generate the report, it'll save the file onto your desktop, and then you can use it for whatever system you use to analyze that. Or if you just want to see, I mean, I can see right now that at least one of my records has a language code. So now I know that that's something that I probably should add to the rest of these. All right. So that's general. You can also do a custom report to search for a specific thing and output it to something specific. You can find, you know, if I want to only find that recipe record that has the language code, then I can tell it to search for the 051, save it to this report. I can do it by record, or you can customize it. All right, tools. Now this is where all the other stuff that Terry has written for us. Like I said, the edit has that wonderful shortcuts that he's done. And then tools is what allows you to write your own. So there's a couple of here that I do think are really important. I mentioned earlier that we had a lot of duplications. I did this record duplication, and you can tell it what you want to use as your fields. So like if your OCLC numbers are carried over into your control number, or if you really, or if all of them are in your your MARC field 35, then you just put that there and it'll look for it there. Deduping, you have the option of separating out the first issue or the last issue. I really enjoy this fuzzy math. Being an English major, fuzzy math is my kind of math. And you can select which version of how fuzzy you want your math to be. Not very fuzzy, super fuzzy. And you can remove the items and save them to a file. Or you can just remove them and not even save them. I found this really useful. I had it search for matches through, it was for our electronic records. So it was a match based on the 038, which they were using as their specific control number. So I was able to use that to compare in case they came in at different times or got coded wrong. I at least knew that was a specific way to match. And so I exported that, and then I was able to give that list to my associate and paraprofessionals, and they were able to manually clean it up within the system. I will close that out. Let me bring up the tools. The next one that I find really helpful, because some of us actually paid an outside source to do this for us before they realized that we could do it all through MarcEdit. He's built a RDA helper to bring in some common things that can be found through other information in the MARC record to fill out and to get your catalog a little bit ready for RDA. And you'll notice it's the 3XX. And you can deselect and select wherever you want. You can choose whether or not you want to add in your copyright and your publication symbols. You can add in the language of coding and the RDA, which is coming a little bit more important, especially with the with OCLC, with Connection having so many records from outside that aren't in English. I personally am okay with letting go of GMDs. I know a lot of libraries have chosen to keep them. And if you're new and you decided you really do want them, you can also generate a GMD based off of the RDA. So the ones that I tend to use is the making sure that the 3XX fields are in there. I delete the GMD to substitute with these. The 260 to 264 is a common issue we are finding in our catalog. So it's great that it will evaluate that and change that. And then it will also expand your abbreviations. So all those COL period, that was very common in AACR2, you now don't have to do with RDA. So this is a way to do that. And you can edit the list. If there's some you don't want, maybe you don't want, I'm trying to think of one, accompaniment spelled out, then that's where you can do it. If you have one, have an abbreviation that was used a lot in-house and wouldn't turn up on the regular list, then you can add it here, resave it, and it will add that. So I'm gonna go ahead and click OK on this. It keeps track of the records. You'll notice how fast that is. I'm jealous if anybody's RDA works that fast, or ILS works that fast in recoding their MARC records, because Polaris does not. Ours doesn't anyway. So I went ahead and did the RDA process. It completed. And you can see here, color illustrations is spelled out. Copyright is spelled out because I didn't have the little dialog box marked that I wanted to include the symbols. There's subfield E's. All of the 300s got created. Oops. And that was done throughout everything. And so it can just make things clearer. It's a wonderful step that's already been pre-programmed for you. You can also, all of these options down here, these are very specific tasks that you can assign at one at a time. If there's just one field that you want to delete, and this is a special batch of records, so you're not going to need to do this task again, then you can select one of these. It's a one-time, the task is not saved, it completes it, and then it's gone. But as we've noticed, a lot of things we end up doing over and over and over again. And that's where you want to build tasks. And within that, you can see this is one that I've already completed. This is part of what I worked on during our pandemic in-house work. So I'm going to open it up. So you have these options. You can clone it, delete it, edit it, create a new one, or you can just change the name. So I'm going to edit this one so you can see what it looks like. So there's my name. I can add a separate direction in here. And then you can see that I just have this one task. I am adding a genre term for all of these picture books. Now, I don't want to add it if it's already been there. So if I edit, it will open up the writing. It'll open up the directions that I've given it. And you can see that I checked the add field only if not a duplicate. You can also add it only if it's not present, and other options down here. But I want it only added if I don't have it already. So I know that I wrote this correctly. I can close it. I can save it. And now, once I have that task, I can go in here to my assigned tasks, all the ones that are available. And you can see the only one I have available right now is to add the genre picture books. And you can see how it did that really fast. I love that he puts up here how long it took, and he uses minutes when it's always seconds, always seconds. It'll show you what I did, the field, the data I wanted to enter it, and it tells me that there were 106 records that it was added to out of the 120 plus that I imported into MarcEdit to work with. So it was there for some of them, but just not all of them. So I can close that out. It's done it. Now, what if you want to build a task? So you go back to your manage, you select new, click select, you name it. It'll give you an option to put in a description, which is definitely recommended if you share. And then you have your tasks. There's nothing there. So I want to add a new task. All of the single actions that were available underneath tools is available here to build your tasks. So say I know I want RDA to be evaluated on every record. I take the RDA helper, the familiar window pops up. It retains whatever I had already selected in there. So I say, all of that's still good. That's what I want. I hit OK, and it files it in there. I want another task. Let's say I want to create a somewhat faceted subject headings. So I am going to be adding a new field. And say I want to add in just something specific onto each one. For example, we are now classifying our picture books based off of the subject. Now, what if they didn't have the subject? You can see on this very first record, the only subject heading is pond animals. We want animals just to be there. So you type in here, again, it's labeled the field as a field. So you don't have to put the equal sign, but only the MARC field goes there. Everything else goes into the field data, which means this is where your indicators go. And then you will build what you want. These are all animals. I want to make sure that animals fiction comes up as a subject for all of these. I don't care where it gets inserted. I only want it if it's not already there. I don't need I don't need it to be listed twice. I'm going to add my field, and it gets added right here. Another common one that I use is to build a new field. And I believe I saw over in the questions about separating out records based off of the 041 field. Absolutely possible. Perhaps you want to extract that from the 041 and put it into a text string in the 500. That is also possible. And what you can do is this build a new field. Again, I will reiterate, it is very important to look at the examples that Terry gives you, because those examples will tell you the format that it's needed. I also have a list of resources that I'll send out after the program with the PowerPoints. But you can see from the example, you do need the equal sign so that MarcEdit knows that you are referring to a MARC field. So I want to pull out all of the subfield Z's and create a 651. So we want the field that we are building is going to be a 651. I want the indicators to indicate that this is a local, or no, this is a LC heading. So I put my indicators in. I'm going to take the information and put it into my subfield A. And then using the, the twirly brackets is what I call them. That is not what they are called, but I don't remember what they're called. So within the little twirly fancy brackets is where you put the information of where MarcEdit is going to pull that information from. So the 651 is going to be populated by any subfield Z's in my 650. So I need to tell it to look at the 650. I need to tell it to look at subfield Z and input it right there. And that's all that I need it to do. So I'm going to close it. If you wind up with, oftentimes the subfield Z may be the last and it'll have a period. If you don't want that period, that's where you can do a straight bracket. I believe it's X. It could be, I have this and I know I wrote it down. And that will take that out. Or maybe it's an N. I'm sorry. Let's try N. We'll see. Oops. We've closed it out. But we also want to make sure that it has fiction on the end. So then we can just write that in because we know it's a fiction. If you had a mixed group of fiction and drama or ones without it, you could leave that blank and instead of, or not type that in, and you could just repeat that 650, but tell it to take subfield V and populate it. I want to add a new field if not present. So I'm going to say always add a new field, because what if the 651 there isn't quite right? You can always go back and dedupe. That's the process. We're going to put it on there. And now we have a whole set of tasks we've built once, and we can save it. So now you can close this out. You can go back to your tools, to your assigned tasks. It'll tell you what's currently available. Now our test is available. When I click that, it's prepping it. It tells you what it's doing. And just like that, it did what we needed to do. We're going to close that. And you can see that there were some little issues. Like for some reason, only ED showed up. I know that that's wrong, not sure why. So we're just going to do a little special undo. We can go back into our tools, manage our task. We can select it, go into it, edit it, open it up, and we can look at this. Now I am going to assume that this was some type of improper coding on my part and take it out. And now we're going to save it again, close it, run it one more time. Going to do it again, close it, and you can see that time it worked. Yay! Any of these tools down here can be used to build your tasks. Once you have your tasks and you want to share, you can export. Instead of the task actions will manipulate the task. The manage is what you can assign a macro key, delete, you can import, you can export. And it makes it into like a little notepad that you can then attach and import. And when you import it, it'll show up just like that. You open it and you can see that it's been imported. Okay, so I know that was an awful lot, but hopefully with those few things, you can get started with a lot of the simple start out projects. And then in the list that I will be sharing, there will be a list to a couple of LibGuides. The University of Illinois has an amazing one. It's over 300 pages long. I'm not going to say that. I'm going to close down that. The University of Illinois has a guide that's close to like 300 pages. It is based off of an older version of MarcEdit, so some things look different, but I find it really useful if you're looking for that guide on how to format things. That is probably the most difficult thing, knowing when you have to use the equal sign to identify the MARC record. You know, the use of the fancy scroll and the fancy brackets and then the simple brackets. All of that is really useful to find in that document that they made. And it's freely available. You can download it to your system. I have a copy saved on my computer just so that I can. The other thing that was a benefit of the pandemic is Terry realized that all of us had to find things to do at home. So he made these great little like 30-minute YouTube videos that will cover a specific task and kind of walk you through. I found those great, and I really appreciated him taking the time and the effort to do that. He's got a lot of documentation that will help you. Sometimes it gets really into the nitty-gritty. I'm working on my coding and my data manipulation evaluation tools so that I will be able to use them more with MarcEdit, but I cannot say how much joy I got just from seeing it work. And this is great program for doing those little things that make it all better, to clean it up. And especially if you're like me and just a little OCD on the formatting of your records, this is a wonderful way for them to have some consistency in them. Does anybody have any questions? I am certainly available if you ever need me, if you have anything specific. I have reached out to librarians local and far wide and had them email me their tasks if I know that they've already done the hard work, specifically for some of the databases that we all share. Canopy records or Hoopla records are notoriously a little unwieldy. I run them all through MarcEdit before I even bring them into our system, just to make sure that there's a more consistency in the way that they look. I see Sarah put up the link to the video series. Oh, one of the video series. There's also some on YouTube. He
Yeah,
said,
Laura, there are two questions.
oh, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, which version of MarcEdit are you using?
I am using the non-administration level. It's the most recent download. It's this, I use the 32-bit. You can ask your IT person if they want you to use the 64. But I am in the current development. I don't normally do the beta until he's worked through it all, since I'm not super confident with that level. So it's the one that I'm in right now is MARC 7, I think it's 7.3. And like I said, it's the non-administrative version. It is just as fully functional as the administrative. The only difference is you don't have to, well, one, involve your IT department, and it'll connect everything up so that if you build a task in your MarcEdit, everybody else will see it if you're the administrator. I find it's just as easy to email them or share on a common drive. So I haven't bothered our IT department with doing that. There are some, I saw a question pop up about shared task lists. In the document that I'm going to send out, the attachments, it does also have a list of some of the universities that have built their tasks, so you can see what they're doing. If you can get a task for somebody, it's really easy to just go in and change a few words. I got one for Press Reader that I asked Jamie to send to me, and although some of the languages that they used in theirs, I didn't need to use in mine. And it's really easy to just edit that straight in the task. So you just don't have to build from scratch.
Yeah. And then Nancy is asking, she has a file of records that are a mixture of English and Spanish. Do you know, is there a way to separate the records based on the 041 field?
Yes, there is. You have to tell it that that's what you want. Just like you can dedupe for any field, you can also pull out any records based off of the field. I believe, trying to remember what it's located on. I think I closed, of course I closed out my my MARC. Let's see if I can get that. And I can tell you what that is under. Custom report. If you go underneath custom report, that by record that I showed you, it has a control field for you to search from, and that's where it can pull it out. You can tell it to search for it, and then you just tell it which file to save it into, and then it'll export into that, and then you'll have them separated. And you could do that with any field, but yeah, the 041 is a common one. I am currently working on how to build one from my fixed field data. But that's my impetus to learn some more. All right.
Okay, are there any other questions?
I know that's a lot. And so, yeah, we'll send out the PowerPoints and the MarcEdit resources. And I hope everybody adds Terry to their Christmas list. One day he's going to retire and I'm going to be so sad. But so far he is dedicated to keeping it going. So thank you very much for everybody for joining. And I hope you're inspired to clean up that data. I think our catalogs are a wonderful resource for the public and our staff. And there's a lot of information coming in them. It is beyond the card catalog now. So everybody enjoy the rest of your Friday afternoon. Stay cool. And we will see you again. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to stop the recording.